What if the first warnings about COVID did not come from scientists, but from dreams whispered in the frozen dark of Alaska? And what if those dreams were not human at all, but the voice of something that knew us better than we know ourselves? It always started with the same sound, a low hum, like wind moving through bones. Then the cold set in. Not the kind that wraps around you, but the kind that grows inside your lungs, like your own breath had turned against you. Every time I fell asleep in February of that year, it was there. The dream. Him. I run a late-night call-in show, Coast to Coast Strangeness, Fringe Science, lonely voices on static lines. People lie a lot on shows like mine, but sometimes they whisper things you can't forget, things that stick. And that February, callers from all over the country, quiet, shaking, apologetic, began telling me about dreams they couldn't explain. I hadn't mentioned mine. Not yet. I remember the night the first one called in. Said she kept waking up, gasping, the air too thick to swallow, her throat coated in something she couldn't cough up. She dreamed of a tall shape, all ribs and shadow, standing beside her bed. No eyes, no mouth. But somehow, it spoke. And what it said made her cry even as she listened. "The breath will vanish." I froze. That was the exact phrase I heard in mine, over and over, a whisper so soft it scraped. I had chalked it up to stress, long hours, isolation, maybe even carbon monoxide. But then the next night, a man from Arizona said he'd been dreaming of ice, of drowning in the air. "The breath will vanish," he said, voice trembling. He told me that, in the dream. I started recording everything, comparing timestamps. I traced the pattern backward, like a blood trail. It didn't start in February, not really. It started in Alaska. 2 years earlier, in 2018, there was a rash of sleep disorders reported across a stretch of remote Alaskan communities. Doctors said it was seasonal affective disorder, sleep apnea, maybe even environmental toxins. But one nurse filed a complaint with a local radio station. She said her patients weren't just tired, they were terrified. And they all described the same thing, a visitor in their sleep who warned of a sickness yet to come. The nurse vanished 2 weeks later, officially relocated. But I found a copy of her voicemail to the station, archived by accident in a podcast feed no one listens to anymore. Her voice was shaking. "It's not a virus," she said. "It's a signal, and it's not just dreams, it's choosing people, preparing them." I had the dream again last night. The sky opened, and the stars blinked like eyes. He was there, watching, waiting. I tried to ask what he wanted, but I couldn't speak. I had no breath. And still, I keep falling asleep. The file wasn't supposed to exist anymore. That's what she told me as she lit the cigarette with hands that shook more than the flame. Her name isn't important. Not now. But once, she worked inside the Centers for Disease Control, in one of the sections with no signage, no windows, and a badge that only buzzed green if you didn't ask too many questions. She had been there for over 30 years, seen things she was never allowed to speak aloud, until the night she called my show and asked to meet in person. We sat in a diner that hadn't updated its wallpaper since the 1970s, the kind of place where the coffee's always burnt and the lights hum louder than the jukebox. She didn't touch her drink, just slid a yellowed folder across the table and said, "Don't read it here." I asked her what it was. She looked past me, toward the window, as if expecting someone on the other side. It was supposed to be shredded after 7 days. That's the rule for foreign anomalous transmissions. Foreign, I repeated. She looked back. Not from any country, from out there. The memo inside the folder was dated April of 2018. The header had been redacted, but a line near the bottom hadn't. It said, "Cross-agency alert. Incident correspondence suggests linguistic origin not consistent with human syntax." Underneath it, handwritten in pen, "Possible warning. Context biological." It was short, clinical. but the attached audio transcription chilled me. Only 5 words, scrawled in neat block letters. The breath will vanish soon. I stared at those words for a long time. She saw my face and nodded slowly. I heard it myself, she said. In the lab. Audio engineers filtered the static and brought it up from beneath the signal noise. We thought it was some kind of prank, maybe rogue data contamination. But then the gnome anomaly happened. And the reports from sleep studies started matching the phrase. She paused. We ran voice profiling. Whatever made that sound, it wasn't human, not even close. The harmonics were wrong, too layered. Like hearing multiple versions of the same voice collapsing into each other. I asked her why she kept the file. Why risk everything? She looked tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, but soul tired. Because this isn't a conspiracy, she said. It was never about control or secrecy. It was a countdown. And most people already slept through the first bell. Outside, snow began to fall. A soft, soundless white. She stood up and left before I could ask another question. I never saw her again, but I still have the file, and sometimes, when I hold it, I swear I hear that voice. Quiet, waiting, counting. Gnome doesn't sleep well in winter. Too much dark. The kind that doesn't just blanket the town but seeps into the bones. Locals say time moves differently up there. The clocks still tick, but your mind starts drifting, skipping, stalling. That year, 2018, people said something else was moving through the dark. Not time, not weather, something older. It started with the Nightwalkers, gnome's name for the insomniacs. The ones who wandered in the snow at 2 a.m. with headphones on, hoping to trick their brains into surrender. The ones who drank coffee just to stay numb. Most had given up on normal sleep years ago. But that winter, even they began noticing something strange. They were dreaming, and not just dreaming, but dreaming the same thing. It wasn't a story they told openly. It passed in whispers at the back of the only bar still open past midnight, in murmurs between sips of something strong enough to make you forget. The voice came first, they said. Not a voice made of words, but one that lived in the space between them, like a signal tuned through emotion. It didn't speak in English. It didn't need to. They described the presence the same way. Tall, emaciated, not bone-thin, but starved, as if it had gone without being seen for a very, very long time. Its head was slightly too large, its limbs too long, and its face blank. No eyes, just a stretched, pale surface, like skin had grown over where a mouth and eyes should be. But somehow, they still felt it watching them. Speaking, one man, a mechanic who worked nights at the airstrip, said he saw it standing in the center of a frozen lake during his dream. It raised one arm slowly, pointed not at him but straight up. He awoke, covered in frost. His bedroom window had been left open, wide, though he swore he closed it tight before bed. The snow beneath the window had no footprints, but there were lines scratched in the ice. Vertical, deep, like claws dragging down a chalkboard made of winter. The bartender, too, admitted to seeing it. She called it the Thin One, and said it stood just behind her reflection in the mirror, not moving, not blinking, only breathing. She said when it opened its arms, she felt her lungs seize up, and then it spoke not into her ears, but into her ribs, like her bones were being used as antennae. All the dreamers said the same thing about how it ended, a pressure in the chest, a sound like the earth groaning underwater, and then the phrase, "The breath will vanish." The town didn't talk about it after that winter, but some never stopped dreaming, and some never woke up. It was not a voice in the way we understand voices. There were no syllables, no mouth-forming vowels, no air moved. Yet it spoke. Those who heard it never remembered the sound itself, only the weight it left behind. A kind of pressure just behind the eyes, like something had been poured into their skulls and left to simmer. Some described it as emotion made solid. Others said it felt like remembering a nightmare you never actually had. But all of them agreed on one thing. The voice spoke like it was dying. Not desperate, not screaming, but unraveling, like someone trying to whisper while the universe was taking its last breath. It always came at the same point in the dream after the cold set in, after the sky folded inward like torn paper, after the stars blinked out one by one. Then came the presence, the tall, hollow figure standing in a place that didn't feel like Earth. No floor, no sky, just a vast, black nowhere, echoing with the ache of forgotten things. And then the message. It never said more than one sentence. The breath will vanish. Some felt sorrow when they heard it. Not their own, but his. A grief that wasn't human. One dreamer described it as the feeling of watching your children drown from behind glass. Another said it felt like being awake inside a corpse. One woman, a school teacher in Anchorage, recorded herself immediately after waking. Her voice trembled as she tried to explain. It wasn't words, she said. It was a feeling, pushed into me. Like the loneliness of stars. Like something watching us fall apart and not being able to help. The most unsettling detail came from a nurse who had never spoken publicly until her mind began to deteriorate. She claimed the entity had once tried to speak normally, in human rhythm, but its voice cracked and bled into static, like it wasn't meant to function in this dimension. She said it gave up, and after that, it began pushing feelings instead. Desperation, warning, and that one final echo, the breath will vanish. Why breath? Why not life? Why not the soul? A linguist who studied early reports theorized that breath was metaphor, that the message meant life will end. But a biophysicist later challenged that. He said breath was specific, respiratory, viral, as if something knew what would come. He died in early 2020, lungs full of fluid, COVID complications, they said, but his last notes were found on a napkin, smeared with ink and blood. 4 words, scrawled over and over. He spoke like he was dying. Her name was Ray. No last name, just Ray. She lived near the edge of Nome, in a shack built partly from driftwood and partly from rusted shipping crates. No one ever saw her in town except when she needed batteries or kerosene. People called her odd, but not dangerous. Just someone who had drifted so far into the woods of her own mind, she'd forgotten how to come back out. That changed in December of 2018. She came to the clinic barefoot, shivering, eyes glassy. Her palms were cut and coated in frost. The receptionist said Ray didn't walk in. She collapsed through the door like something had been chasing her across the tundra. She kept whispering the same phrase. He has no eyes, no eyes, no eyes. They sedated her and kept her for observation. But after she woke, she wouldn't speak again. Not until someone mentioned the dreams. One of the nurses had been having them, same as the others. The tall thing, the voice that wasn't a voice, the message no one could forget. When she casually described it during a shift change, Ray sat bolt upright and began to cry. I saw him, she said. Not in a dream. I was awake. Ray claimed it happened the night before the first snow. The sky had turned a strange gray-green, like the air had curdled. Her generator had failed. No lights, just wind and the sound of her breath. She stepped outside, and there he was, standing on the frozen marsh behind her cabin, still as death. She said he wasn't glowing, not floating, not radiating power like in the stories, just standing there, waiting. She tried to scream but couldn't. Her lungs refused. He didn't move, just tilted his head slowly, as if studying her. She said his face looked stretched, like it wasn't skin, but something pulled over an empty shell. Where the eyes should have been, there was nothing, not even sockets. Just smooth, pale hollows that seemed to drink in the darkness. What disturbed her most wasn't the face. It was what she didn't see. She said nothing reflected in those hollows, not her flashlight. Not the stars, not even the moonlight. It was like looking into a hole where reality folded in on itself. Ray didn't run. She said her legs wouldn't let her. Instead, she dropped to her knees and wept. And in that moment, he leaned closer. She felt his breath, not warm, not cold, just presence. And then, he spoke. The words never reached her ears, but they reached something else. Deep inside, the breath will vanish. Later, a tribal elder told the clinic director that Ray's description matched something from old Inuit stories, a silent one. A watcher from the sky, with a face stretched smooth like seal hide, who visits only before great sickness. They called him the one without reflection. He didn't draw it with intention. At least, that's what he claimed. His name was Julian, a geology student taking a gap year in Nome, working odd jobs and sleeping in his van. He'd come up to Alaska for quiet. What he found was something else entirely. The dreams had started after a night of drinking beside a frozen lake, where the stars looked too close and the wind whispered things he didn't understand. The next morning, without thinking, Julian found himself sketching strange loops and arcs in the margins of his notebook. He wasn't awake when he did it. Not fully. He called it automatic drawing, like his hand had a plan his mind wasn't privy to. A spiral, then a curve, then another. Always the same shapes. By the fourth morning, the pattern began repeating identical angles, same sloping turns, always clockwise. A smooth, almost lazy path, but oddly precise. He didn't show it to anyone until Ray, the woman from the woods, caught sight of it at the gas station. Her hands trembled when she saw the spiral. "You saw him," she said, eyes wide. "He gave you the path." Julian laughed it off, said it was just a doodle, something he made up in a half-dream. But later that night, after his third whiskey, he sent a photo of the sketch to a friend who studied cartography in Fairbanks. What came back the next day changed everything. His friend had overlaid the sketch just for fun onto a globe projection. It lined up almost perfectly with a chain of cities that, 2 years later, would all become early hotspots for the coronavirus outbreak. Wuhan, Milan, Tehran, Madrid, New York, even Seattle. Not exact pins, but the curve passed close enough that it felt impossible to ignore. Julian didn't know what to make of it. He had drawn it in 2018. COVID wouldn't even have a name until the tail end of 2019. And yet here was the path already etched into his dreams. Not just one city, a network. A shape that didn't look like a map until it was laid across the earth. The most disturbing part wasn't where the curve went. It was where it ended. In the middle of the Pacific, just south of the Aleutian Trench. Open ocean. Nothing there. At least, nothing visible. Julian sent the final image to a researcher at a climatology institute, someone he trusted. 2 days later, that researcher emailed back one line. "That's not a travel pattern," she wrote. "That's a bloom cycle. A bloom, like a virus. Like something seeded growing from point to point, unfurling in spirals." Julian stopped drawing after that, but the spiral never left his mind. He said it felt like something trying to unfold inside him. And always, in the center of that curve, he heard the voice. The breath will vanish. His name was Marco, 17 years old, soft-spoken, with a twitch in his left eye when he got nervous. He lived with his uncle in a trailer near the edge of Nome, not far from where Ray once saw the thing with no eyes. Marco didn't talk much, but he wrote constantly, little notebooks filled with dream fragments, taped together pages with frantic sketches and scrawled warnings. Some said he was just imaginative, others said he was touched in the head, but after he died, no one said anything at all. It happened on a Wednesday in January, snow so thick you couldn't see past your hand. His uncle had checked on him just after midnight. Marco was asleep, breathing heavy, twitching under the covers. By morning, he was cold, jaw clenched, eyes wide, and his mouth open in a way no one could explain, like he had died mid-scream. The coroner's report was quiet at first. Probable respiratory failure, it said, but that didn't explain the lack of trauma or the absence of infection. What really disturbed the examiners came later after the lungs were opened. There was a film, thin, black, oily, not mucus, not fluid, something else. It coated the interior of both lungs like soot, but didn't match any known substance. No bacteria, no viral markers, just residue. Like something had passed through him that didn't belong on Earth. They ran samples. Nothing grew. Nothing reacted. The lab tech handling the slides said it smelled faintly metallic, but also burnt. Like scorched breath. His uncle handed over the notebooks the next day. The last entry was dated 2 nights before he died. It said, "I saw him again. He stood at the foot of my bed. No face, just that stretched smoothness. He leaned close, closer than ever before. I didn't wake up. I couldn't. He opened his hand and showed me a shape, like a blooming flower made of bone. And then he said it. Again. Only this time, I felt it inside my chest." The entry ended with a single phrase, underlined over and over until it tore through the page. "The breath will vanish." The clinic didn't list Marco's death as related to any outbreak. Official cause, unknown respiratory collapse. But the nurse who found the body said something strange. She said his room smelled like frost, like winter had crept in through the cracks and curled up inside his lungs. And the way he looked when they found him mouth open, muscles frozen mid-contraction, it didn't look like sleep. It looked like he died in the middle of a scream. But no sound ever came. His name was Cal Rooker, and he hunted the high ridges west of Nome the way his father and grandfather had before him, quietly, respectfully, never taking more than he needed. In early November of 2018, Cal set up a trail camera in a narrow pass not far from Devil's Backbone Ridge, hoping to catch footage of migrating caribou. He never expected what it would actually record. The footage was only 2 seconds long. 1 frame, really. He didn't even notice it until days later, when he reviewed the footage at home. The night had been clear. No wind, no clouds. The trees swayed slightly in the moonlight. Then, mid-sequence, came the glitch. Not a light, not a ship, just a shape. Hanging in the air like a vertical slit of shadow, darker than the night around it. Not casting light, consuming it. You could see the pine trees behind it in the previous frame, and in the next. But for one frozen instant, they were gone, replaced by something that looked like the absence of everything. Cal paused it over and over, leaning in close to the screen. It wasn't a UFO, he told his neighbor later that week. It wasn't something flying. It was something opening, like the world folded for a second. He printed the still frame, kept it in his coat pocket like a warning. The next night, no one saw him in town. By morning, the house was empty. The door was open, lights still on, coffee half poured in a cup beside the sink. Cal's wife and daughter were gone. No signs of a break-in, no struggle. Just 2 beds left unmade, a dog still tied in the backyard, and his boots by the door. The authorities searched for 3 weeks. Planes, drones, nothing. But what disturbed the deputy most was what they found near the trail cam. A perfect ring of frost. Even though the snow hadn't fallen there yet, the grass inside the circle had frozen solid ice crystals reaching up like fingers. Animals wouldn't go near it. Birds refused to fly over it. Something had pressed down into that place. Not with weight, but with presence. The trail cam was missing. All that remained was the printout Cal had made of the strange opening. His neighbor turned it in, and one of the investigators took it to a retired physicist in Anchorage. She stared at the image for a long time, then said quietly, "That's not an object. That's a threshold. No one speaks Cal's name in Nome anymore. His cabin stands empty, the wind rattling windows that no longer face the same world. And in the silence he left behind, one sentence seems to echo through the trees: the breath will vanish. They thought it was nonsense at first, random noise buried under static, like the aftertaste of a dream you can't quite name. The recordings came from sleep clinics, therapy sessions, and in some cases, old cassette tapes mailed anonymously with no return address. A chorus of voices describing the same message: the breath will vanish. But buried beneath that phrase, there was something else. Not language, not sound. Pattern. The turning point came when a linguist at a private institute in Zurich ran a spectral analysis on one of the longer dream recordings. What she found wasn't speech, it was structure. Beneath the emotional timbre of the voice, there were frequency pulses, spaced out like a code, not Morse, not digital, but rhythmic. Repeating. She cross-referenced the pulse intervals and discovered they corresponded to a base 60 numerical pattern. Sexagesimal. The same system used by the ancient Sumerians over 4,000 years ago. That was the first crack in the silence. A task force of rogue researchers formed quietly, outside of official channels. Linguists, cryptologists, archaeohistorians. They pooled recordings from across the globe, each one from a dreamer who had encountered the eyeless figure. And in every case, the same rhythm hid beneath the surface. A silent code made of pulses: short, long, pause, repeat. When translated into base 60 numerals, the results were chilling. One sequence matched the year of the Black Death, another matched the date of the Antonine Plague. Then came the Spanish flu, the Asian flu, the Hong Kong strain. Even smaller, localized outbreaks, like the Marburg virus in Germany and the Nipah clusters in Bangladesh, all encoded in tone and breath, like memories passed down not through voice, but through vibration. The lead analyst finally said what the others were too afraid to. "The voice isn't speaking in language," she whispered. "It's speaking in plagues." They theorized the entity wasn't just warning us, it was reciting a timeline, a catalog of events tied to the failure of breath. Every pandemic was another number, a digit in a cosmic sentence still being written. One researcher lost sleep for weeks after decoding a phrase embedded in the final sequence. A cluster of tones that translated when layered into the Sumerian word for again, not past, not history, a return. That's when they noticed something else. The newest recording contained a number that didn't match any known outbreak. It was dated 2 years ahead. A date that hadn't happened yet. They thought it was a mistake. Until December of 2019, until Wuhan, until the breath began to vanish again. It arrived in a plain, padded envelope. No return address, no postmark, just the words, "For Dr. Halvorsen," scribbled across the front in shaky black ink. The receptionist at the university lab almost threw it out. Junk mail, maybe. A prank. But Dr. Halvorsen was curious, the kind of man who once dissected a dead pigeon just to see if avian flu left clues in the beak. So he opened it. Inside was a single item. A cheap plastic USB stick, scratched and gray. No label, no note. He scanned it for viruses first, of course, clean. Then he opened the folders. What he found should not have existed. There were 3 files. All simulations, viral propagation models. Not unusual for someone in his field, except these weren't models of the past. They were forecasts. And the final file was dated February of 2018. The first showed a slow, silent spread through an open-air market. The second, a time-lapse of exponential curve acceleration once air travel became a vector. The third simulation was more detailed. Population clusters, lung failure markers, cytokine storms, asymptomatic carriers, spikes in hospitalizations, lockdowns. It was COVID-19, nearly to the decimal. But the date said otherwise. Each file came with metadata indicating it had been created well before the virus was ever named, before anyone had even heard of Wuhan. The code was clean, elegant, predictive beyond what any forecasting model should have guessed. It didn't look like guesswork. It looked like memory. At the very bottom of the USB was a fourth file. Just a single image, white background, black text, in block letters. "We are the symptom doctor." Halvorsen sat for nearly 10 minutes before he dared open it. He expected a manifesto, or a warning. Instead, the file contained only a blank page, followed by a strange audio waveform, an unplayable, corrupted sound file. He sent it to a colleague in acoustic forensics, and that colleague called him the next morning, whispering into the phone like someone was listening. "It's not broken," she said. "It's layered, like a cord made of breath." And there was something else. The pattern embedded in the waveform, subtle, almost too faint to catch, was the same numerical signature flagged by the Zurich linguist. Ancient Sumerian intervals. The ones tied to historic pandemics. Dr. Halvorsen never reported the drive to authorities. It disappeared from his office 3 weeks later without a trace. No forced entry. No signs of search. Even the envelope was gone. But he remembered the title burned into the image. Not "They are the symptom, we are." As if something had been watching us all along, and we weren't the target. We were the warning. It started with blood. A simple draw from one of the Gnome Dreamer's routine, almost forgettable. But the technician flagged something odd in the mitochondrial DNA. An unusual variance in the D-loop region. Something so specific and rare it hadn't shown up in their database before. At first, it was dismissed as an anomaly. Then, it appeared again. And again. And again. All the dreamers, those who had seen the eyeless figure, who heard the warning in their sleep, shared the same mutation. Not just similar, identical. The anomaly was mitochondrial, which meant it was passed down maternally. And according to existing records, fewer than 1 in 10 million carried it. But every dreamer in Nome did. Even Julian, the geology student. Even Ray, the recluse. Even Marco, the teenager who died screaming into silence. It should have been impossible. The anomaly itself didn't cause disease. It didn't trigger cancer, didn't weaken immunity. But it did alter the way cells regulated stress, particularly oxidative stress tied to the lungs and brain. The findings were quietly passed to a team of geneticists in British Columbia, people who specialized in rare haplogroups. One of them, Dr. Céline Moreau, ran a cross-reference against international data gathered during the first wave of the pandemic. She didn't sleep for 3 days after the results came back. Among early fatalities in Wuhan and Milan, a statistically significant subset carried the same mutation, not in all patients, not in most, but in a specific group, the ones who died fastest, the ones whose lungs collapsed with terrifying speed. It wasn't causative, it didn't cause death, but it was like kindling primed to ignite once the spark hit. She checked again, a second database, then a third. The pattern held. When Dr. Moreau presented her findings at a closed-door meeting, someone from the intelligence community asked a simple question. "Are you suggesting the virus recognized the mutation?" She said no, then paused, and said, "I'm suggesting something did." A silence followed, not because the room didn't believe her, but because deep down, some of them already did. Later that month, Dr. Moreau received a package on her doorstep. No note, no return label. Just a vial and a data stick. Inside the vial was blood. Inside the stick were voice recordings, dreams, dozens. And a single file with a transcript, translated from a frequency pattern, the phrase repeated across every recording, "The breath will vanish." But in one file, there was an addition, a line that had not appeared in Nome. It said, "We entered the code long before you knew you were written," as if it wasn't just warning us about a virus, as if it had been waiting for the right ones to be born. The old woman called it the purging breath. She said it came not to kill, but to weigh. Her name was Analuk, one of the last living elders from a coastal Inuit village swallowed by time and sea ice. She didn't speak often, and when she did, it was never in haste. But when researchers played her one of the Gnome dream recordings, something shifted in her eyes. She didn't flinch. She nodded. "That voice is not new," she whispered. In her tongue, she had a word for it. Taraktuk, the one who sees without eyes, the one who waits in the cold places. She told them the purging breath was not a sickness. It was a wind that came when the world had tilted too far. Not to punish, to balance, a spirit, or perhaps something older than spirit. Something that did not see life and death the way humans did, but measured harmony, purpose, resilience. When researchers cross-checked her story against the encoded messages found in the voice frequencies, they found a match. One passage, barely translated, read, "The culling is not cruelty, it is calibration." It appeared in other dream transcripts too. Words like threshold, measure, reset. That was when Dr. Niles, one of the virologists who'd been studying the strange genome mutation, said the thing none of them wanted to hear aloud. This isn't about infection, it's about filtration. According to the data, those with the rare mitochondrial mutation were more sensitive to atmospheric shifts, more prone to lung collapse, yes, but also more adaptive to certain environmental changes, more likely to survive sudden altitude drops, more likely to recover from oxygen deprivation, traits that meant something, perhaps, to something watching. It wasn't just biology being tested, it was readiness, the voice, the dreams, the spiral that matched the outbreak zones. They weren't prophecies. They were mechanisms. A reset didn't need to come with fire or ice. It could come with a breath that turned sharp, a thinning of air, a whisper that rewrote the rules of survival. One of the linguists found an old Babylonian tablet that mirrored a phrase from the dream recordings almost word for word. The gods do not slay the unworthy. They simply forget to carry them forward. Somehow, this was not the first purge. There had been others, and there would be more. Analuk said the figure, with no eyes, appeared in her dreams once, long ago. It did not speak. It placed its hand over her chest. Then it vanished. When she woke, her breathing was deeper, slower, like the air knew her name. She had lived through a dozen plagues, a dozen storms, buried half her village. But she never feared the wind. She only feared the silence that came after. The silence that asked, "Are you still meant to be here?" It was during the winter of 2020, in a lab no larger than a dentist's office, that someone noticed it. A technician named Rafiq had been running audio samples through a spectrogram analyzer, studying the differences in coughing patterns among sleep clinic patients. Most were mundane, dry, wet, rattling. But a handful stood out, not because of how they sounded to the ear, but because of what they did to the machine. The spectrogram showed pulses, ultrasonic bursts, clean, spaced, non-random, like a digital fingerprint etched into the breath. At first, Rafiq thought it was interference, background noise. But the pulses weren't in the room. They were in the cough. And not all coughs, only those from patients reporting recurring dreams of a tall, eyeless figure and the phrase, "the breath will vanish." He isolated one of the waveforms and played it through a modified speaker, translating it into a human audible range. The sound was barely more than a whisper like wind trying to remember a song it once knew. But here's what changed everything. The lab assistant listening in the room at the time, someone who hadn't reported any dreams before, collapsed within minutes. Not physically, mentally. She described it later as a flood of memories that weren't hers, names she'd never heard. A voice that said, "Not all lungs breathe air." And then came the dreams. The following night, she saw the figure. That's when they realized the sound wasn't just sound. It was a carrier. Researchers in Helsinki and Seoul independently verified the anomaly. Audio spectrograms from coughing dreamers consistently showed the same pulses, ultrasonic signals, just outside the range of natural speech. Some suggested it was bioacoustic resonance. Others whispered the term consciousness vector, a signal that rides breath, triggers receptors not in the ears, but somewhere deeper. The pineal gland, the thalamus. No one agreed, but all of them admitted one thing. It behaved like a message, not language, not music, something else. One neurologist likened it to tuning a radio inside the mind, shifting perception, adjusting frequency of thought. And the kicker? The pattern embedded in the cough matched a series of chirps recorded in the Marianas Trench 5 years earlier, once believed to be a new form of whale communication. But now, maybe not. The voice that spoke in dreams may not have needed words. It had breath, it had vibration, and through the cough, it had a key, a way to echo itself into every room, every body, every mind that still remembered how to listen. She didn't sleep that night. Ray hadn't in a while, not the way most people do. Her dreams had stopped being dreams. They were more like arrivals. And this one, she said, felt different. It wasn't the figure with no eyes this time. It was something else, something beneath. She said, it began with cold. Not the kind that touches the skin, but the kind that wraps itself around the bones. A pressure, a weight, like the earth remembering something it had buried on purpose. Then she was falling, not fast, not through sky but through layers. Layers of ice, layers of time, layers of silence so deep it had a pulse. She landed in a corridor, not stone, not metal, something between. The walls were smooth but alive, moving with the breath of the planet. Light came from nowhere. And then the voice returned, but it didn't speak, it showed. She said the ground peeled open beneath her feet, and through the crack she saw an entire city frozen beneath the Alaskan ice shelf. Not ruins, not ancient buildings, not fossils, machines, towers like inverted lungs, rings like petrified eardrums, spirals shaped like sound made solid. It was breathing, she said. Not asleep, not dead, just waiting for the right temperature. She watched as thin plumes of mist rose from cracks in the ice, like sighs. The machines were waking slowly, dream-drunk and mechanical, but they knew. They had been placed there long before humans walked upright. And at the center of it all was a spire taller than anything Ray had ever seen. No markings, just rhythm. The walls pulsed in time with the same cough patterns from the recordings. And from it came that same frequency, the message, the one no one could ever quite translate. She asked, aloud, though she didn't know to whom. Who built this? And the voice that wasn't a voice answered. Not builders, carriers of what, she never got to ask. Because the vision began to fracture, like a mirror held too tight in shaking hands. Before she awoke, she saw one final image burned into the city's skyline. A map, but not of roads, of breath, of outbreaks, of places the cold had touched and pulled back from. Like measuring ripeness, she believes now the dreams weren't just warnings, they were echoes. And the city beneath the ice was not a tomb, it was a lung, and it had just taken its first inhale in 1,000 years. Dr. Ian Kellerman never believed in anything he couldn't measure. He was a sleep specialist by trade, the kind who thought dreams were just neurons making noise while the brain cleaned itself. But that changed when a woman named Ray handed him a recording, not of her dreams, but of her sleep. The audio was low, crackling, but under the surface was something strange, a rhythm, not snoring, not apnea, a kind of pulse, like a signal embedded in breath. Dr. Kellerman called it a sleep spiral, a pattern that deepened every 90 minutes, but instead of rising back toward wakefulness, it kept descending, past REM, past known states of consciousness. into something else. He began studying others who had similar dreams. Those who spoke of the eyeless man, of cities under ice, of breath that vanished. Their sleep charts were identical, and every one of them followed the same spiral: deeper, slower, lower. The dreams didn't come at random. They came at the bottom of the spiral, where body temperature dropped and brain activity flickered into frequencies never charted before. And with each descent, the dreams grew louder, clearer, until the voice stopped using symbols or emotion. It simply spoke. One patient said the voice whispered, "You are being tuned." Another said, "This is the inhale before the change." Then, some stopped waking up. Not comas, not death, just refusal to rise. Their bodies functioned, their hearts beat, but their minds were elsewhere. Scans showed activity in the thalamus stronger than most waking states, but no response to external stimuli. It was as if the spiral had reached a place below dreaming, a place that wanted them. Dr. Kellerman tried it himself. He wore a sleep cap, adjusted his breathing, took a sedative to extend his REM. For the first 3 nights, nothing happened. Then on the 4th, he saw it. A staircase made of breath. And at the bottom, a doorway. It did not open, but something knocked from the other side. When he woke, his heart was racing, and his hands were wet with something cold. Not sweat, not water. Something that evaporated before it could be tested. He's since stopped experimenting, but he still charts patients, still watches the spiral. And one thing terrifies him more than the dreams. The spiral is changing. In some patients, the descent is faster now. The thresholds come sooner. The voice starts speaking before the second cycle, as if whatever lies below sleep is getting impatient, as if it knows more of us are listening, and it no longer wants to wait. It came at the end of a recording taken from the deepest point of sleep ever captured on civilian equipment. A patient in Anchorage, hooked up to a modified neural monitor, had descended so far down the spiral that her brainwave patterns no longer registered in known categories. Not delta, not theta. Something colder, slower, like her mind was not asleep but elsewhere. When she finally surfaced, she couldn't speak. Her mouth moved, but sound wouldn't follow. She simply reached for the recording device and pressed play. Most of it was static, garbled breathing, soft impacts like underwater heartbeats. Then a voice clearer than it had ever been. Low, hollow. It didn't echo, it absorbed. It said one thing. COVID was the first bell. That was all. The sentence made the temperature in the room drop. No one spoke for nearly a full minute. When asked what it meant, the patient could only shake her head. But her pupils were dilated, as if she was still somewhere down in the spiral, still listening for a second bell. The phrase began showing up elsewhere, in transcripts, in whispered dreams. Even in frequency analysis, one researcher found that when cough recordings were layered over each other, slowed to a specific pitch, the waveform visual formed the shape of a bell, not random, structured. Then came the timelines. A virologist from Oslo noticed a chilling alignment. The same mitochondrial markers found in early COVID fatalities also matched victims from older outbreaks, SARS, MERS, even some of the more aggressive strains of influenza. The further back they went, the fewer matches they found, until the data stopped aligning, as if COVID wasn't just a virus, it was a signal, a threshold event, a resonance check, the first bell, and that implied a second. One dreamer, a teenager from Fairbanks, drew a picture after waking up in tears. It showed 3 bells hanging in the sky, each one darker than the last. Underneath the first bell, it said, "The breath weakens." Under the second, "The blood listens." Under the third, "The sleep ends." He said the eyeless man told him to remember the sound, not the words, the sound. And when they played the Anchorage recording again at half speed, the final phrase stretched out not just a message, but a tone, A chime, a calling card, as if something vast and patient had rung a bell across the entire planet. Not to warn us, but to let the others know we were ready. Not ready to be saved, ready to be seen. The request should have been routine. A journalist named Carmen Rios filed it through official channels, citing the Freedom of Information Act. She asked for documentation related to anomalous sleep studies conducted in Nome, Alaska, during the early months of 2018. She even included specific case numbers, pulled from an old whistleblower's message board post that had since been scrubbed from the archive. 3 weeks later, she received a slim envelope from the Department of Health and Human Services. Inside, a single page. It said, no such records existed. No studies, no admissions, no patients, no files. But that wasn't true, because Carmen had already spoken to 2 former CDC contractors who remembered the Nome event clearly. They described it as the respiration anomaly. At the time, it was believed to be localized, maybe fungal, maybe viral. A dozen patients complaining of shared dreams, labored breathing during sleep, and unexplainable fear of the cold. But the most bizarre detail was the uniformity. The patients hadn't met, came from different neighborhoods, yet they all described the same figure, tall, silent, watching them from the foot of their beds. Every one of them said the same thing. He has no eyes, but he sees us anyway. One of the contractors, an epidemiologist who asked to be called Thomas, said the CDC flew in under the pretense of a mold inspection, but what they brought wasn't hazmat gear, it was audio equipment, EEG monitors, specialized temperature regulators. They weren't studying illness, they were measuring depth. Thomas recalled one test in particular. A patient was placed in a sleep chamber, cooled several degrees below normal. During the 3rd sleep cycle, his oxygen levels dropped, but he didn't wake. Instead, he began speaking in his sleep. Not words, numbers, a sequence that matched an ancient Sumerian algorithm linked to solar eclipse timing. They recorded it, transcribed it, stored it, then erased it. The Nome files dozens of pages, scans, logs were sealed, then purged sometime in early 2020. Shortly after COVID cases began surfacing in Asia, when Carmen followed up, she received a call from someone who wouldn't give their name. All they said was, the files weren't deleted, they were reclassified. She asked what that meant. The voice replied, it means someone higher up thinks the dreams weren't random. They think it was the first attempt at contact. Carmen asked one last question before the line went dead. Then why hide it? The voice didn't hesitate. Because it worked. And just like that, the call ended. No return number, no record. Just a hollow envelope, a missing case file, and the quiet terror of knowing that something spoke and someone in power listened. The leak came from an unmarked drive mailed to a retired biochemist in Vermont. No return address, no note. Just a post-it on the casing that read, "This is not fiction." Inside the encrypted archive was a folder labeled simply, Somnian, the biochemist doctor. Greta Langford had once worked with DARPA on early-stage cognitive mapping projects. When she decrypted the files, what she found made her stomach turn cold. It wasn't just research, it was a manual. Project Somnion had apparently begun in the early 2010s under the guise of sleep-related PTSD mitigation for veterans. But by 2016, its scope had shifted. Heavily redacted memos outlined something far more disturbing: conscious viral transmission. The theory wasn't entirely new. That thoughts, feelings, and even visual hallucinations could be passed between individuals in tightly synchronized sleep states. But Somnion went further. They believed information pure, non-verbal data could be seeded into the subconscious through engineered dream frequency, and they believed something not human had already figured out how to do it. One section of the file was titled Foreign Signal Capture. It described recurring anomalous readings from remote Alaskan sleep monitoring sites, fields of low-frequency pulses that matched no natural or artificial source. The waveforms appeared only during deep sleep stages, and only in a handful of individuals who shared no known connection. They dubbed these individuals nodal dreamers. Every one of them experienced the same dream within 48 hours. A tall figure with elongated limbs, standing in snowfall that made no sound. The figure never moved, it only watched. But what followed was always the same: coughing, breathlessness, and the overwhelming sense that something ancient had just exhaled beneath the earth. Somnian researchers tried to replicate the signal artificially. They failed. Whatever it was, it didn't originate from human technology. That was when the Department of Defense classified the project under black budget status, reassigning it to a facility in Nevada with no public footprint. The files showed a list of new codenames: Echo Lung, Silent Choir, and one simply labeled Bell 1. Then came the line that chilled Dr. Langford most, buried in the margins of a scanned memo, handwritten in red ink. If this is viral consciousness, it means infection is not through contact, it's through attention. Dr. Langford never shared the drive with authorities. She backed it up, encrypted it twice, then hid it in a hollow wall behind her fireplace. But she still checks her dreams every morning, because now she believes the dreams are not messages, they're containers, and we were never meant to open them. The question was asked offhand, almost like a joke, during a late-night podcast that barely anyone listened to, but it didn't feel like a joke when he said it. Why would you build a lab in Antarctica? What exactly are they trying to keep away from? The host, a former contractor for NOAA, claimed he'd seen a restricted topographical model, something that wasn't meant to exist. It showed heat signatures under the ice, deep beneath certain U.S. scientific stations. Not volcanic, not geothermal, something pulsing. At first, nobody paid attention. Then a listener, an amateur satellite analyst named Joel Meeks, dug deeper. Using open-source infrared overlays and archived thermal scans from the past 10 years, Joel began compiling a map of U.S. research outposts across the southern polar region. That's when he saw the pattern. The stations weren't placed randomly. When their coordinates were plotted on a global projection and overlaid with the drawing from Ray's dream, the one she called the Sleeping City, the alignment was exact, not similar. Exact. The curve of the ice stations matched the outer ridges of the dreamer's pattern, one station per point, like anchors. Joel cross-referenced the same overlay with the dream maps from Nome, Anchorage, and Juneau. The same result. The stations didn't form a network for exploration. They formed a barrier. The term containment grid wasn't Joel's. It came from a leak posted to a defunct message board used by former intelligence contractors. A single thread appeared with no author and no timestamp. It read, "The grid isn't to keep people out. It's to keep what's underneath from waking up too fast." Beneath the post was an old, grainy image, a satellite shot taken during a brief period when solar flares disrupted official feeds. In the middle of the frozen continent, blurred by distance but still visible, was what appeared to be a geometric depression in the ice, perfectly circular, too smooth to be natural. The file name was Bell 2 Forming. JPG. Nobody knows who uploaded it. The site was taken down 6 hours later. Joel tried to trace the location of the depression, but when he pulled the most recent topographic data, the entire area had been redacted. Not just blurred, replaced. It was as if the land itself had been erased. He sent the data to 2 geologists, both of whom said the same thing. That's not a depression, that's a dome, and domes mean pressure. Which begs the question, if the first bell was COVID, and if Antarctica is the hinge point of whatever comes next, then the dreams weren't just warnings. They were blueprints, and the ice isn't what's hiding it. The ice is what's trying to hold it in. The logbook was never supposed to be seen. It wasn't digital, no backups. Just faded ink on yellowing pages sealed in a box marked MISC Unit 3. The handwriting was precise, military, the kind that looked like it belonged on a clipboard in a field tent. But what it said that was anything but standard procedure. The first entry was dated November of 1968. That year, the world was facing what came to be known as the Hong Kong flu. It didn't make headlines like the later pandemics. It killed, yes, but quietly. Most people forgot it even happened. But not the soldiers at Thule Air Base in Greenland. According to the log, 24 servicemen began reporting vivid, recurring dreams during the peak of the outbreak. Not nightmares, exactly, just too real. All involved snowfall, breathlessness, and a figure standing at the edge of their vision. One line, repeated throughout several accounts. He waits in the frost. He hums through the wind. The medical officer who compiled the notes, Captain R. Ellison, marked the cases with a red pen and referred to them as frost hum anomalies. But what made the entries more than just strange sleep talk was what followed. A sudden rash of respiratory collapse. Healthy young men, fit, active, began experiencing breath loss during REM cycles. A few were placed on oxygen. One never woke up. The autopsy mentioned something odd, a thin black residue in the bronchi. No known cause. No foreign substance detected, just a phrase typed at the bottom of the coroner's notes. Possible fungal bloom or thermal degradation. The file was quietly closed, but not before Captain Ellison made one last note. Dated January of 1969, it read, "Patient 32 drew the figure. Same proportions as the others. Said it's not a man. Said it's a gate." Decades later, when the page was scanned as part of a digitization effort, the AI indexing software flagged the phrase gate next to respiratory failure and cold pattern sleep interference. That scan got picked up by an analyst reviewing dream-related data during the early days of the COVID pandemic. The similarities were too specific to ignore. Patterns in breath loss, recurring dream figures, black residue in the lungs, but most chilling of all, the image, the drawing by patient 32, archived on paper since 1969, matched nearly perfectly with the sketches made by Ray and the Gnome Dreamers. Same limbs, same blank face, same presence, which means whatever reached out in Alaska in 2018 had already spoken once, before, and we didn't listen, not in 1968, not even when it tried again. It started as a sleepwalking episode. That's what her mother thought, anyway. Middle of the night, early December, 2018. She heard the back door creak open, then the crunch of boots on snow. When she got outside, her 6-year-old daughter was standing barefoot in the yard, arms raised to the sky, whispering words that didn't sound like any words at all. By morning, the girl, Emma, was fine. But she no longer spoke English. Not a single word. Doctors thought it might be trauma or seizure-related aphasia. But her brain scans were normal. Her hearing was fine, and what she was speaking wasn't nonsense. It had grammar, it had structure, and when audio of her speech was shared, anonymously, with a visiting linguist from the University of Helsinki, the man reportedly went pale. He asked for the clip to be played again, then a third time. He didn't say anything for almost a minute. Then, very softly, he said, "This sounds like early Uralic, but older. Before Proto-Finnic, before writing." He wasn't guessing. The man, Dr. Ilari Koskinen, had spent over 20 years studying the fragmented roots of ancient Eurasian languages. He'd published a paper once, dismissed as fringe, suggesting that remnants of a pre-human syntax, something he called core word scaffolding, could be found in the deepest substrata of Uralic roots. Language not developed through cultural evolution, but imprinted, as if passed down from something older. Emma was speaking in that. Not mimicking, not babbling, speaking. When asked what she was saying, she couldn't translate it. She only said it felt like a shape in her mouth, and that when she spoke it, the dreams stayed away. Dreams she never had before Nome. Dreams of long corridors under white stone. Dreams of a voice that didn't echo. Her mother tried recording her, but the recordings came out distorted audio glitches, static bursts, like something scrambled the tape. The only usable clip was captured accidentally on a neighbor's video doorbell. When played back on a spectrogram, the waveform had an irregular harmonic band, one that closely matched the bioacoustic pattern identified in the coughs of infected dreamers. Emma's voice, the linguist said, wasn't just language, it was resonance. Dr. Koskinen later disappeared en route to a linguistic summit in Prague. His laptop, bag, and phone were never found. He was last seen boarding a flight from Stockholm. The airline confirmed he never arrived. Emma eventually stopped speaking the unknown language, but every once in a while, her mother hears her whisper it in her sleep. Always the same phrase, 3 syllables, no translation. But according to the linguist's notes, those syllables match an inscription carved into a shard of black stone, excavated near the Lena River in the early 1950s. The stone is housed in a locked drawer at the university. The label underneath reads, "Pre-verbal contagion. Do not replicate aloud." It started showing up on forums. Not the big ones, small, quiet places. Niche, sleep-tracking communities, lucid dreaming message boards, archives that hadn't seen new posts in years. Someone would mention a strange dream, and someone else, sometimes from another continent, would respond, "Wait, you saw him too?" No one ever described him directly. They didn't have to. Everyone already knew. A tall shape, standing, watching, no face, no movement, just the weight of something ancient pressing down through the snow. It never chased. It didn't need to. It was already inside. By January of 2019, the dream was being reported in 17 countries. No news coverage, no health alerts. Just a pattern rising quietly, invisibly, like mold on the edge of memory. A woman in Johannesburg posted about waking up with bleeding gums and the image of a symbol burned behind her eyelids. The same symbol later showed up in a sketch posted by a teenager in Seoul. They had never met, never spoken. Yet they drew the same thing, a spiral breaking into teeth. A trucker in Saskatchewan told a late-night AM radio station he kept hearing a song in his dreams. No lyrics, just low, slow pulses. He said it sounded like breathing underwater, like someone inhaling the ocean. A musician in Poland recognized the pattern from a sound installation he'd created using sleep data. When he played the original sequence backward, it matched the exact harmonic pattern flagged in the Nome spectrograms. People who'd never been to Alaska, never heard about the dreamers, were dreaming the same thing. It was spreading, not through blood, not through touch, through attention, like an idea that skipped the brain and went straight to the lungs. The CDC was silent. The Pentagon said nothing. But someone somewhere knew. Internet threads started vanishing. Podcasts discussing the Nome anomaly lost entire episodes. A sleep researcher in New York posted a warning, then deleted her entire account 10 minutes later. Before she vanished, her final post was archived. It read, "This is not mass hysteria. This is not a coincidence. This is dream infection. There is a pattern in the unconscious now, an invasive thought form hitchhiking through shared imagery. If you see the figure, do not describe him. Do not draw him. Do not hum the tone. And above all, do not listen when he calls your name." The post ended with 3 words. Dreams can spread. And now, even people who never believed in aliens, viruses, or sleep transmission are starting to whisper the same thing. "I didn't dream this. It dreamed me." It came from a defunct server tied to an old NOAA subdomain, hidden in a zip file named Whisper Archive, buried under layers of archived sonar data. No one knows who uploaded it or when, but once opened, the file contained only a single document, no metadata. No author, just a list. 13 phrases, each one followed by a date, each date matching a major outbreak, anomaly, or unexplained cluster of deaths. The first phrase, "The breath will vanish." The date beside it, December of 2019, COVID-19. The second phrase, "The water forgets the lungs," August of 2014. A wave of children hospitalized with unexplained pulmonary paralysis in the American Midwest. No virus was ever conclusively identified. Third phrase, "Blood shall forget its bones," March of 2009, the Hananan outbreak. The first flu strain to bypass typical immune memory in multiple age groups. The list went on. Each phrase stranger than the last, some poetic, some cryptic. One simply said, "You were never built for the sky." The date matched the onset of Gulf War syndrome. All 13 matched something, not just pandemics. Sometimes it was an unexplained surge in sleep paralysis, or a cluster of suicides in a remote town. In one case, it coincided with a complete radio blackout in a Siberian observatory, followed by the deaths of 4 researchers, listed as respiratory asphyxiation of unknown cause. But the timing wasn't what scared people. It was the structure. Every phrase came exactly 1,024 days before its event. Not 1,000. Not a rounded guess. Exactly 1,024. A number that, in binary code, reads as a full stack, a maximum pattern buffer. In some programming languages, it marks the upper limit of unbroken recursion before failure. The implication? These phrases weren't warnings. They were calls. Each one sounded like a bell. And if COVID was the first bell, then there are 12 more echoes waiting in the dark. Some people think the document is fake. That someone retrofitted poetic language onto tragic events to create a conspiracy. But a linguistic AI at a Swiss lab ran analysis on the phrasing patterns. Its conclusion? All 13 entries show signs of having been written by the same hand and not a human one. The grammar obeys nonlinear syntax rules. Phrases loop back on themselves when read sonically, not visually. One phrase, when whispered and played backward, matches a frequency that triggers deep delta brainwaves in sleeping subjects. The last phrase on the list has not yet matched any event. It reads, "And when the 13th bell rings, the dreamer will breathe through stone." The date beside it? It's still in the future. At first, they thought it was just noise, a repetitive pulse buried in cosmic static, too faint to flag, too consistent to ignore. It came in just under the hydrogen line, the frequency space where no natural celestial bodies typically speak. The signal repeated every 7 hours and 21 minutes. Like a heartbeat that forgot it was supposed to stop. The first telescope to catch it was in northern Chile, then Australia, then one near Tromsø, Norway. 3 different continents, same rhythm, same distortion, same strange echo. It wasn't until a technician compared the waveform to archived GNOME recordings that the true shape revealed itself. It matched the voice from the dreams, not the words. There were no words. Just resonance, just emotional compression and pulse structure. But when converted to audio using cochlear-inspired mapping algorithms, the wave did something impossible. It made people feel, not emotions. Memories. People listening to the signal began weeping uncontrollably. Some collapsed from panic. A few heard whispers in languages they'd never studied. One radio intern in Malaysia blacked out and began sleep-talking in a dead dialect from the pre-Akkadian Sumerian basin. No prior exposure, no trauma history, just contact. The voice was back. But this time, it wasn't coming through dreams. It was coming from space. Specifically, triangulation placed the source near an empty patch between galaxies, a gravitational cold zone with no stars, no planets, and no known mass. Some scientists argued it was just a reflected echo from a past pulsar. Others suggested a glitch in decoding software. But those who'd studied the GNOME anomaly knew better. The voice was checking in, like it had sent out a signal years ago, and now quietly, Methodically, it was listening for replies. The weirdest part? The message wasn't constant. There were gaps, pauses, and within those pauses, another frequency emerged far lower, almost tectonic. When sped up, it sounded like breathing, not machine noise, biological rhythm. One astronomer, working solo in Alaska, layered the space signal over the audio from dream recordings. When combined, they produced a harmonic beat, 4 Hz, linked to deep trance states and the suppression of conscious motor function, sleep. The signal wasn't just broadcasting, it was tuning, preparing the world for something, and maybe the dreams were never warnings. Maybe they were invitations, a frequency seated inside our unconscious, waiting for the right bell to ring. Now the telescopes all agree. The source is getting louder and closer. They called it the sound that wasn't meant to be heard. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was true. The clip came from a hacked research archive tied to an experimental audio lab in Berlin, just 5 seconds long, raw, unfiltered, without metadata. No one even knew how it had been recorded. But every person who listened to it described the same thing. Their body locked, their breath caught, and a metallic pressure bloomed behind their eyes like something ancient waking up. 3 listeners collapsed. 2 of them seized. One woman described it as feeling like my own bones were trying to dream me back. But it wasn't just the physical effects that raised alarms. It was what happened when you didn't listen when the audio was played just below conscious threshold, at subliminal levels, inside white noise generators, or layered into the hum of everyday appliances. That's when the message revealed itself, not in words, in rhythm, a pattern. Someone at the lab ran a neurofrequency scan and mapped the peaks and troughs. When translated into Morse, then fed through a sequential timing algorithm, it formed a date string. Not in human calendar format, but in sidereal alignments, star positions known only to orbital astronomers. Then came the final decoding. It was a countdown. To what? No one could say, but every full cycle of the sound ticked 1 step closer to 0. And the strange thing? The countdown matched neither computer clock nor cosmic rotation. It matched something else. Human sleep cycles. Each iteration aligned to global REM pattern shifts. Like the signal was watching us dream and measuring how deep we went. The research team shut everything down after one intern began sleepwalking every night at the exact timestamp of the audio's harmonic spike. On the 4th night, she walked directly into the sea. They found her shoes perfectly placed on the dock, her phone still recording. On the audio, you could hear her whisper the final tone of the leaked file before she vanished into the waves. The clip has since circulated in encrypted corners of the net, passed around like a curse. Most who hear it feel sick. Some forget entire hours afterward. A few dream in fractals. But no one hears it and walks away unchanged. It's as if the sound knows you, like it's not just being played, but remembered. And there's a rumor now among those who've looped the file hundreds of times in secret. The countdown ends soon, and when it does, you won't be able to wake up. It started over the Pacific, east of the Aleutian Chain just after midnight. A pilot on a cargo route radioed in what he thought was an atmospheric missile trail, corkscrewing into the night sky. But it didn't vanish like vapor. It held, glowed, and slowly began rotating against the stars, like something watching. They called it the Alaska Spiral. At first, meteorologists blamed it on failed rocket tests, but no launches were scheduled that night. And the spiral didn't dissipate, it just slowly unraveled and faded, like fog peeling back into a hidden fold of sky. Then the calls started coming in. A fishing crew off the coast reported the entire crew frozen in their bunks, not dead, not comatose, just paralyzed. Eyes open, pupils dilated, muscles locked like rigor mortis, but hearts still beating. The next night, the same spiral appeared over northern Norway. Same shape. Same slow unwind. 3 villages nearby reported mass sleep disturbances. Not insomnia, not nightmares, sleep paralysis. One woman described it like drowning in glass. She was unable to scream, but saw a shadow kneel beside her bed and place something cold against her chest. When she finally broke free and woke, there were bruises circular, perfectly symmetrical, and faintly pulsing. Hospitals couldn't explain it, and the spirals kept appearing, over Chile, over Indonesia, over the Sudanese desert. Every time, the same sequence followed: spiral in the sky, flickering pressure in the air, and within 24 hours, a burst of reported sleep paralysis events spiking on hospital intake records. It was never violent, never theatrical, just quiet, slow terror. Doctors began publishing anonymized EEG scans, showing abnormal wave interference just prior to the paralysis, a rhythm not consistent with natural brain activity. Like a fingerprint printed in reverse, an anti-pattern. One neurologist called it a synthetic dream lock. Another went further. He said, "These spirals aren't natural formations. They're beacons." When overlaid with satellite wind maps, the spiral paths formed a rough lattice across the globe, and when cross-referenced with deep-sea listening stations, the same sound pattern found in the Nome dreams echoed from under the Mariana Trench. The signal wasn't coming to Earth anymore. It was coming through it. Whatever it was no longer content with dreams. It wanted the space between dreams, the paralysis gap, the liminal veil, the place your soul sits still while your body forgets how to breathe. The spirals aren't warnings, they are keys, and every time one appears, more people go silent in their sleep, still breathing, still dreaming, but no longer alone. The note was found folded inside a Bible, tucked between Psalms and Lamentations. The handwriting was shaky, pressed hard into the page, as though the man had been fighting to get the words out before the fever took him. His daughter found it the day after he died, in a hospital ward overwhelmed with coughing and alarms. It read only, "I saw the second one. It wears a skin." The man's name was Robert Hale. He was 82, a retired bush pilot from Nome, and he had been one of the first documented dreamers back in 2018. Back then, he claimed he saw a figure with no eyes. His descriptions matched the others exactly, but he never spoke about it again, not until the end. In his final week, nurses said he refused to sleep unless sedated. When he drifted off naturally, his vitals would spike. His body fought, even as his breath failed. One nurse swore he whispered a phrase over and over during those restless nights. "It's close. It's closer than you think." After his death, his daughter shared more. She said he had called her one night in March of 2020 and told her he had seen a change. When she pressed him, he went quiet, then said, "The first one only showed itself in silence. But the second wears a mask. It's already walking among us." He told her not to tell anyone, that people would think she was mad. But when the virus reached their small town and Robert caught it, he seemed almost relieved, as though the sickness had been expected, as though it was just part of the sequence. The detail about the skin unsettled the researchers who later reviewed his note. It suggested embodiment, not the faceless shadow in dreams, not the breathless figure in paralysis, but something that could pass, something that could wear us. An anthropologist compared Robert's words to an old Inuit legend about the Tornit spirits who could take human form by slipping inside the body of a dying person. The resemblance was too close to ignore, and when cross-referenced with Sumerian texts that described beings called mask-bearers, the pattern deepened. Both cultures separated by oceans and millennia, yet both describing the same terror, visitors who could hide inside us. Robert's last words to his daughter, spoken through a failing mask of oxygen, were even worse than the note. "They're not arriving," he rasped, every syllable a struggle. "They're waking up." Then his eyes rolled back, and the machines flatlined. No one in the hospital knew why the room temperature plummeted just before his heart stopped. No one could explain the frost that rimmed the inside of his window despite the heater being on full. But his daughter swears she heard something else in the silence. A second breath. Not his. Something inhaling, as if the skin was already filled. The final transmission was not spoken, not written, not even heard. It arrived as weight, as gravity bent into thought. The last of the Nome dreamers, those still alive, reported it almost simultaneously in early spring of 2021. They woke, gasping, blood in their throats, whispering the same line before lapsing back into uneasy silence. The wakeful must guide the sleepers. At first, no one knew what it meant. Researchers treated it like metaphor. Philosophers said it was myth, but the pattern spread, carried not in air but in silence. Patients under observation began sketching diagrams, circles within circles, people standing on the edges, one figure always awake while the others lay in spirals at their feet. It wasn't prayer, it was instruction. The linguists who had been mapping dream frequency harmonics found embedded sequences, nested commands in the resonance itself. A 3-step cadence, repeating endlessly. 1. Fall into the spiral. 2. Remain tethered by one who resists. 3. Listen only when the others cannot. It read like a ritual. The implications were horrifying. If true, the voice wasn't speaking to all of us. It was demanding structure, a division between those who wake and those who surrender. A chain, like shepherd and flock, like operator and vessel. Ray, the recluse who had once seen the city under the ice, said she felt the meaning more than she heard it. It wants balance, she whispered to the one journalist who still visited her. If all of us dream, it drowns us. If all of us wake, it cannot breathe through us. It needs both. It needs to choose. The warning wasn't simple survival. It was choice. Who would stay conscious to anchor the others? Who would lie down and open their lungs to something vast and patient, waiting to fill the hollow inside sleep? In one leaked CDC report, a phrase was scrawled in the margin: wakeful, witness, sleeper's e-conduit. No signature, just that. Some cults already began enacting the ritual. Families dividing themselves, one parent staying awake for days, the rest entering engineered deep sleep with white noise machines pulsing the Nome frequency. Neighbors heard screams. They said it wasn't the sleepers screaming, it was the one who stayed awake. The ritual felt less like salvation and more like an ancient demand returning to claim its due. And still, the phrase repeats. In hospitals. In the breaths of those dying of the virus. In the gaps between radio static at 3 a.m., the wakeful must guide the sleepers, not to protect them, to lead them where we are not meant to go awake. The discovery was almost an accident. A team of geologists surveying permafrost melt in the Yakutia region stumbled upon it when a river shifted its course after an unusually warm spring. The water carved through a bluff of frozen soil and revealed something no one had expected to see: black stone, cut smooth, polished as if by tools no known culture of that age could have made. At first, it looked like a wall. But as more of the soil collapsed, the structure grew. An archway, fractured but intact, standing against the weight of 10,000 years of ice. The stones were fitted without mortar, locked in place by geometry so precise that even under glacial pressure, they had not cracked. One of the archaeologists posted a blurred image before the authorities sealed off the site. The photo circulated for only a few hours before it vanished, but not before others saw it. The shape was unmistakable, an inverted spiral carved into the stone. The same spiral Ray had drawn after her vision of the city beneath Alaska. Carbon dating of the surrounding soil suggested the structure had been buried for at least 30,000 years, long before the first known civilizations, long before even the cave paintings of southern France. Yet the style was not primitive. It was mathematical. The most disturbing detail came from a linguist who reviewed the etchings along the archway. The symbols were not random scratches. They were protoforms, shapes eerily close to the syllables spoken by the little girl in Anchorage who woke from her dreams speaking a dead language. The ruins were not just old. They were remembered. A private memo from a Siberian field officer later leaked to the press. It read, "The structures extend deeper. Ground-penetrating radar shows cavities at least 400 meters below. They are arranged like lungs. This is not a city. This is a body." The phrase spread quickly. A body beneath the ice. Some whispered it explained the dreams. That what we thought were warnings were actually memories, echoes of the last time these structures stirred. The Ice Age may not have ended naturally. It may have been an attempt to freeze something back into silence. Ray, when shown sketches of the ruins, only nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "But that's just the edge. The heart is still deeper." Her words sent a chill through those who heard them, because if the ruins in Siberia matched her vision, then the city under Alaska was not unique. It was one of many. Proof that they never truly left. We just forgot the last time we heard them breathe. The proposal was not made in a public paper or at a university. Lecture. It surfaced instead as a classified briefing, leaked in fragments to a journalist who barely understood what he was holding. The documents described a hypothesis that chilled even the most skeptical reader. That the human body itself was being reprogrammed, reshaped over centuries to act as a receiver for something not of this earth. The idea was bold and terrifying. What if the pandemics that swept through humanity were not random accidents of evolution, but timed intervals of calibration, each wave of illness forcing subtle shifts in immune response, in lung capacity, in the delicate patterns of mitochondrial DNA? Each outbreak leaving survivors a fraction more sensitive, more aligned. The phrase that stood out in the memo was underlined 3 times. The body is the antenna. The researchers claimed that COVID was not just a virus, it was an update, a stage in a long process. The deaths, the chaos, the grief, all tragic byproducts of something larger at work. Those who lived through it carried traces, not just of antibodies, but of changes that could not be explained by immunology alone. Microscopic structures in blood cells had begun to show unusual crystalline formations, as if the body was slowly weaving itself into a lattice. When one whistleblower, a geneticist from Geneva, he was pressed about the significance. He whispered a single sentence before refusing to speak again. "We are becoming an instrument." The sleep dreams now seemed less like warnings and more like early broadcasts. The alien voice did not need radios or satellites. It had seeded the very biology of its listeners. Once tuned, the body itself would resonate with the transmission. That was why the messages came most strongly in dreams, when the conscious mind loosened its grip, when the body's rhythms were at their most vulnerable. Skeptics dismissed this theory as pseudoscience, pointing to the lack of concrete proof. But buried in the leaked files were images that raised unsettling questions. Brain scans of dreamers showed neural activity lighting up in patterns that resembled antenna arrays, symmetrical arcs firing in harmony, as if responding to an external frequency. One file, marked only with the word somnion, included charts mapping outbreaks across centuries. The Black Death, the Spanish flu, the forgotten flu of 1968, and finally COVID. Each followed by reports of unusual dreams, of strange languages spoken, of visions shared across continents. The memo ended with a line so stark it read more like prophecy than science. "The next signal will not come as sickness. It will come as awakening. If true, then everything we thought we knew about survival was wrong. The virus was never the threat. The virus was the key. And we, the dreamers, the coughing, the restless, the ones who woke shaking in the night were not the victims. We were the receivers." The phrase first appeared in the transcripts of a dying dreamer. His voice was shallow, rasping, yet clear as he whispered, "The final bell is for the mind. Doctors assumed it was delirium, but those who had studied the earlier messages knew it carried weight. Every bell before had been tied to the body, to lungs, to breath, to blood. This one was different. It pointed to something no vaccine or mask could defend against. Psychologists began piecing together patterns in survivors of the shared dreams. Some emerged shaken but unchanged. Others, however, came back with a strange clarity, as if they had been rewired. They described visions not of illness or death, but of vast networks of thought, stretching beyond the individual. They said the voice was not outside them anymore, it was inside, speaking in their own cadence, their own memories, as if thought itself had been joined to another current. Reports surfaced of clusters of people who had never met, yet shared identical dreams down to the smallest detail. They woke quoting the same phrases, drawing the same spirals, humming the same low tones that no one else could stand to hear. It was as though their consciousness had been threaded into a single fabric. One neurologist compared it to a radio, suddenly tuning into a channel it had always been capable of receiving but never accessed. He warned that the shift was not about survival of the fittest in the old sense. It was survival of the most receptive. Those who could not hear would remain blind, fragmented. Those who could would become something else entirely. Governments tried to intervene. Warnings were issued against participating in dream cults. New medications were developed to suppress REM sleep. Yet the phenomenon only grew. The more they tried to stop it, the more people reported the dreams breaking through. Even waking hours were no longer safe. Some claimed to hear the low tones in the hum of electrical wires, in the white noise of machines, in the wind itself. What terrified the authorities most was not the dreams, but the behavior of those who understood them. These individuals no longer feared. They no longer panicked. They moved with calm certainty, saying things like, "This has happened before, and we were meant to hear it now." The final bell was not sounding in lungs or in genomes. It was sounding in consciousness. And it was not asking who could survive, it was asking who could interpret. Because once the bell rang fully, those who had not listened would still breathe, still eat, still live. But they would remain outside. The rest, those who understood, would step into something else, not an ending, not extinction, a handoff, from flesh to thought, from the body to the mind. She lies in a small medical ward in Anchorage, her body pale and still, her chest rising and falling with the slow rhythm of a sleeper who has never stirred. Nurses call her the dreamer who never woke. She closed her eyes during those first waves of dreams in Alaska back in 2018 and did not return. For 7 years now, she has remained in that twilight state, neither dead nor truly alive, a vessel breathing quietly while the rest of the world struggles to explain what she became. Her doctors expected her brain to wither, but it has not. The scans show activity unlike anything they have ever recorded. Instead of the gentle hum of unconsciousness, her brain pulses in sharp, layered patterns. The lines curve and cross like songs folded into themselves, like radio waves carrying meaning. One researcher compared it to standing beneath a cathedral bell tower and hearing the same note ring out endlessly, except in her head there are hundreds of bells, all harmonized, all building towards something larger. When they first ran an audio translation of her neural pulses, the room fell silent. The sound was not random static. It was the same timbre, the same strange resonance as the voice dreamers had reported hearing. A low, aching tone that bypassed language and settled straight into the bones. The woman's brain had become indistinguishable from the voice from the stars. Some scientists fear she is no longer dreaming at all. They believe she is transmitting, a living conduit, her mind stretched across distances we cannot measure. Others believe she is receiving, tuned permanently into the frequency humanity is only beginning to hear. Either way, she has become proof that the warnings were never just hallucinations. Something real moved through her, and it never left. Her family visits still. They speak to her softly, as if their words might reach her through the labyrinth of signals spiraling in her head. But the truth is harsher. She is no longer theirs. She belongs to whatever intelligence first whispered across the frozen nights of Alaska, and there is a detail that unsettles even the skeptics. Every year on the anniversary of her sleep, the monitors in her room change. For exactly 13 minutes, her brainwaves shift into perfect symmetry, locking into a pattern so precise it looks less like biology and more like code. The researchers have not decoded it. They only know it repeats. The dreamer who never woke up may not wake at all. But perhaps that was never the point. Perhaps she was chosen, not to live in this world, but to bridge it, a human body repurposed into a message, a reminder. And if her mind is now indistinguishable from the voice that warned us, then the final question is not whether she will wake, it is whether the rest of us already have.